Hi, everyone. It's Amy Lindner Lesser, your host, coming from my very messy desk, as you can see. Which way do I point? That way. I've been in the middle of a project and just said, okay, we're going to go. And I didn't have a chance to clear off the desk. So you get to see the backside of my office and my operations. So I'm glad you're here today. I have a special guest who is going to talk about a different area of loss and of grief. And it's one that's extremely timely for early fall, end of summer. So my guest is Marci Hawkinson, who's a certified life coach, author, podcaster with one of her sons, public speaker, and group facilitator. She specializes in helping women work through big transitions. And together, you would work to confront fear, to make solid decisions, tackle logistics, and create a new life, one that's in alignment with your personal values. In her spare time, free time, not sure what that is, she loves to read, travel, have deep conversations, and create memories. Marci lives in Newton, Kansas with her husband and their Cavapoo puppy, Echo. She's the proud mama of 3 young, thriving adults, one of whom is her co-host on her podcast, Raising Bigs. So help me welcome Marci. Welcome to Introspection, the podcast about moving from grief to growth. I'm Amy Lindner Lesser, your host. Introspection started out as a podcast about hospitality, innkeeping, and innkeepers. After about a year, I realized that my life and interests have morphed from hospitality to helping others navigate from grief and loss to growth and living. In this new version of Introspection, I will be talking about my personal experiences with loss, and there are quite a few, what I've learned along the way through my professional training, as well as from my coaching experiences. I'll also be bringing in guests to share interesting ideas. So grab a beverage, find a comfy place, take a deep breath, and listen in.
Hi there, Amy. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. I'm great, and I'm honored to be here today to talk to you about raising bigs.
So Marci, tell me how you got started in a podcast.
Yeah, so I have been a life coach now for about 4 years and started listening to podcasts probably about 5 or 6 years ago and kind of became a junkie. I would listen to podcasts every time I was in the car. I would listen if I was on a walk, if I was doing chores and stuff around the house. I constantly had podcasts on. And to the point where sometimes I would get overwhelmed and have to take a break and listen to some actual music, right? Because you can only take in so much information before you have to integrate it into your life. So I've always been kind of fascinated with the whole podcasting world, and I had seen more and more people with a message to share just starting a podcast, like not even really knowing what they're doing. I had zero idea how to produce a podcast. But my son and I, who both happen to work we have a story and a half house. There's 2 bedrooms up here. His bedroom and headquarters, he works from home and goes to school from home, is in one half of the upstairs, and my headquarters is in the other. So when we are up in HQ, we are throwing ideas back and forth at each other. And he is a very wise soul for being 21. And he's like, Mom, you've been talking about doing a podcast for a long time. And I said, yeah, I would really like to do one. He's like, then why aren't you doing it? And so I started thinking about what the messaging would be that I would want to get out there, because I coach on transitions, all of life's transitions, primarily women that I help. But one that I have been living essentially for the last 7 years is sending kids off to college, right? Doing that launch piece when they are moving out of your home and moving up and out. And I have a lot of friends going through the same transition, right? And whether it's your first or your last or your only, a lot of those feelings are the same. So that was something that I thought, you know what, there's got to be information out there. So I started digging, and there really is nothing out there in the podcast world, even in the book world, for parents of what I call bigs. I did childcare for 17 years. Anybody shorter than me was always called a little, right? One of my friends had kind of coined that term for her daycare kids, and I stole it. And best ideas, right? And so I started calling my bigs after they got taller than me, which they all are, calling them my bigs. And so I said to my son, his name is Cade, and I said, would you be interested in doing a podcast with me? Because there is nothing out there for people who are raising kiddos this age. There's also nothing out there for young adults to talk to them about how to better their relationship with their parents and how to navigate all of these life changes that are going on for them. So thus Raising Bigs was born. And so we decided, well, we're going to record the first one, and we're just going to figure out how to do it, as we had no idea. And I had sat through one very brief training with the woman who actually certified me as a life coach. And she kind of ran through, here's some of the tools she uses. She has a podcast, shout out to Jen Ride. And so I started looking at what she used, and she uses some of the higher end tools. And I'm like, I can't afford that. Like, I'm trying to make my business go on its own, right? And so we sat down, we recorded the first one in Zoom. And then I just got on some different software, and I figured out how to get it processed, how to get it up. I definitely wanted it up multiple places. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to put it up on Spotify, which then puts it up on Apple for me. And then we decided to go with YouTube as well, just because I know that there's some trend there, and some people like to watch videos rather than just listening to the audio. So we just dug in, got up to our elbows, figured it out, and it still is not fancy. I think we've recorded 21 episodes now, and have published 16. We still don't have an intro. We don't have an outro, except what we say at the beginning and end of each episode. We don't have any fancy music, but I'm kind of loving the way that is, because I am a very authentic person, and it is authentically us, and we are doing it raw, and we are doing it real. And that kind of just at this point adds to the ambiance. So eventually I might get a little fancy with it, but for right now, we're just having fun with it and getting a lot of really good feedback.
Do you have a regular schedule that you're posting? And
yes, we've been putting it out every week. We started with every Monday, and we were actually saying that in the podcast. And then we realized sometimes life happens and mom doesn't get it up on Monday. So it does come up every week. Ideally, I'm shooting for Monday, but we all know, right? Like, life happens. And again, because I'm all about being authentic, like, we just changed it and started saying every week.
I'm curious. I don't know that my kids, who are now quite a bit older, would have been interested or willing to do a podcast with mom when they were 21. Was it pulling teeth?
No, not at all. I have 3 kids total, ranging in age from 25. Actually, he just turned 26 to 21, 2 boys and a girl. And the older 2 are actually going to be guests on the podcast on occasion, as well as maybe some people who have some unique outlooks on parenting bigs, or people who have some of the science behind raising bigs. But for right now, it's just been Cade and I. But we really are excited to have a project together. And, he has a lot of friends who will say to him, can you ask your mom what she would do about XYZ? Because they've hung out in our house, right? Like, I make an effort to know my kids' friends. And he saw them struggling. And, half of our listeners are people in the 20s. Half of them. The other half are all people who are raising bigs, right? So it's parents, sometimes it's grandparents. I think our oldest listener tracks in the 80s. And so, I did not have to pull teeth at all. He is a very outgoing person, and very open and willing to share his stories and his viewpoint. So yeah, it was very easy actually to get him to do that. And I think he's very proud of what we've put out, and the feedback he's been getting from his friends has been really good as well.
I love the fact that he called you on doing your idea. Like, don't just talk about it, put it into action. I think that's fabulous.
Yeah. And I taught them by holding them accountable for things like, hey, you got a dream, you need to chase it, right? Well, then now they're turning it on me. But I love when I hear things they say come back to me, or things I say come back to me, because I think we're all growing together, right? And in a family, that's the way it happens. No one person grows in isolation. And so I think it's really great, even if there's families that have had issues with their teenagers, being able to maybe create a better relationship with those kids when they are young adults because they're now out on their own, making their own decisions. There's a lot of parents that need some coaching on how to let go and how to allow the child to have their own life and build their own life and be that curious observer, right? And that support system when you are asked and not sharing opinions unsolicited and trying to still control or judge the choices that your children are making.
You had, when we talked before this podcast recording, you had mentioned that he's going to be leaving. Oh, how will that affect, or will it affect your podcast together?
Yeah, so that was actually one of the things we talked about before we even started it, is how awesome it's going to be for us to have this track history, right, of recording this podcast together on the same level of the same house, and then to be able to carry that on when he moves. He's planning to move about 8 hours away, and so I won't see him as often, but the fact that he will be able to be in his space in Colorado and I'll be able to be in my space in Kansas and we'll still have that connection, right? And those calls about, you know, not only how is life going for him and what is he interested in and what is he doing and who is he meeting, all of those typical conversations, but also podcast topics, you know, what order we should put them out in, what things are seeming timely, scheduling, even when we get that done. He, you know, works full time, he's getting his master's, he's training for a marathon, so he's a busy guy, and so we have to sit down at the beginning of the month and plan out when we're going to do it. So I'm really looking forward to still having that project to work together when he is living away.
Well, I think it's one thing, it's a guarantee that you will have time to communicate. Because I know for me, when my kids moved out after graduation from school and whatever, it was very hard to get into their schedule. And, you know, as a parent and as a social worker, I understand their priority is their life, not my life. And so it was very hard to schedule.
You know, every kid is different. Like my oldest, I heard from him every single day while he was in college. Like, and it might have been as simple as a tweet, you know, where he tags me, or it might have been, you know, a FaceTime call as he's walking across campus, which he works on a campus now and still does that. That's kind of our time together. Where his sister, I don't necessarily talk to her as often. She only lives 30 minutes from me. I don't talk to her as often, but I tend to have a standing date with her once a month. So every child is different. And so beyond the podcast, like it's hard for me to predict what the pattern will be with Cade once he's gone, but we are really close. I'm actually close to all three of my kids, and that was through intentionality and design, right? I've worked very, very hard on that for 20 plus years to build that relationship, and so I'm anticipating that I will hear from him regularly. But we have a lot of avenues that we communicate on with his brother and sister that live away. So we have a text group that's just the three kids and me. We have a text group that is just my three kids, myself, my husband, and my daughter's boyfriend. And so we even created a new last name for that group, you know, that was based on a joke. And but we fire things off, right, with different groups. I'm sure they have a text group that doesn't include me as well, which is great because my favorite part of parenting is watching my kids relate and grow together and have that relationship. But, you know, that's just texting. That's one way in which we keep in touch. But we also send each other memes. We send each other TikToks. Every avenue that we can use. I may not talk to them, like physically hear their voice every day, but you know, if a couple days go by and I haven't heard from them in any format, I'm like, okay, mom needs sign of life, you know, and it might just be a heart. Like that might be all I get on my text message, but it's yes, I'm alive. So you know, every kid is different and every journey is different. But again, I'm glad I'll have this project with Cade to discuss as well as how he's finding it living on his own so far away.
So let's talk about empty nest, because I'm guessing this is going to be the first time for you that there will be no children, even though they're not children, they're adults.
He moved out once before for 2 weeks. That situation did not go well with the roommate. Whoop. So he moved home. So for 2 whole weeks, right? Like, I didn't have any kids at home. You know, when they're adults, if your relationship has grown and progressed in a healthy manner, right? He's still living his life, he's running his life. He just happens to be doing it from my house, right? And we have figured out ways to coexist as adults, him, my husband, and I in the same household. My husband is not his dad, it's his stepdad. So, you know, Tim, my husband, had to get used to having a kid living at home, even though the kid was a grown adult, you know, another grown man living in the house. But yeah, this will be the first time. And not only is he leaving, but he is taking our 2 beagles with him. So 2 of our 3 dogs will be moving with him. So thus the puppy. I like couldn't stand. I'm like, you can't have my last kid move out and take both my dogs and expect me to be okay. So I got a new puppy, but you know, it is going to be interesting because he travels a lot. So we jokingly say he's been prepping me for this because he'll be gone for a week, 10 days at a time because he has a remote job. And so he can pick up his computer and just go wherever. So he's gone and stayed for a week several times with his grandparents. He's traveled and checked out new cities and trying to decide where to live. His best friend is a flight attendant, and so he travels quite a bit with her. He goes out to see his brother, and so when he's gone, sometimes I get a glimpse of what it will be like for a week to not have him in the house. So it's kind of the slow ripping off of the Band-Aid, right? But it'll be very different when it's not just a week and it's longer than that. You know, this isn't my first kid to launch. I've launched 2 others. So I can anticipate what my feelings will be or what that will be like. But till you're actually in the moment, you don't know. And I know with the other 2, it was different both times. The hardest part for me was in the early fall. You know, there's all this excitement around what decision are they going to make when they're a senior, and then their whole senior year is like one tear fest after another as they experience all these lasts, right? It's the last time they're going to have a first day of school. It's the last time, you know, we're going to have the senior night at football, whatever that might be. And so that year in and of itself is hard. And then there's all the excitement in the summer of getting them ready to go. So even if it's not college, my experience has been all 3 of my kids have wanted to go to college. But whether they are you know, moving into their own apartment or they're, you know, moving in with another relative somewhere else. There's all kinds of ways that it can happen that you find yourself with an empty nest. But again, not my first time doing it, but several weeks after they've left, it's not like they're on vacation anymore. And it really sinks in. It's like, am I really enjoying the quiet in this house or is it kind of creeping me out? And am I really okay with not being in their daily orbit? Because you're right, they're not thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves and all the new things they're experiencing. And like, oh my gosh, you mean toilet paper doesn't magically appear? I have to go to Sam's and buy yes, yes, you do. Um, you know, all of those kinds of things they're figuring out on their own. Or if they are on a college campus, they're trying to make new friends and they're trying to find new places to belong. And so if you get that weekly phone call, from my experience with my friends, like, you're lucky. And, you know, I've always advised parents, let your kid take the lead in how they want to communicate with you, at least at the beginning, because you don't want to be that parent that's calling every day, every other day. And then your child starts to resent your contact as an intrusion into their new life, right? That they're developing. So I plan to let Cade take the lead on how often he's reaching out. If it were to go on, right, and I wasn't hearing from him for several weeks, number one, that'd be very out of character for him. But I probably would reach out and say, hey, can I hear from you a little bit more often? Like, I miss you. And not I need you kind of a thing, because that's not their job, right? Like, if you as the parent don't have enough going on in your own life to keep yourself busy and distracted during this time, right? And I'm not saying distracted by scrolling. I'm saying actually like you're going out with your girlfriends or you're going to knitting night or you're doing something like that, then you need to get your own life and make sure you've got enough going on so that your kid doesn't start to view you as someone who they need to fill a need for.
We always had sort of an unwritten rule, which came from my parents, which was whenever I was not living at home. So when I was in college or after I'd gone to graduate school or moved out, once a week. It was, and in those days we didn't have cell phones, there was no texting. with my kids, by the time they were ready to move out, there was. And it was like, I don't care what it is. Once a week, I just want to hear, hi, I'm fine, or I'm not fine, and this is what's going on in my life. I don't need details. I just like to not go more than a week.
And my hope would be, and I've always wanted this with my kids, and that's why I've worked so hard on my relationship, and why I encourage parents who may not have the strongest relationship with their young adult, but to continue to work on it, is if something really great happens in their life, I want them to think, gosh, I really want to share this with mom. If something really tough happens in their life, I want them to say, you know what? My mom will have something really helpful to say to me on this. So I really want to call my mom. It doesn't have to be that every day I need to know what friends they're hanging out with or what bars they're checking out or what new restaurants they went to this week. But like, I want to be there still in the capacity of their mother to support them and love on them. And they know they have a soft place to fall. I know my oldest comes home at Christmas time for a week from Washington, and like he sleeps like the dead when he is here, because it's just like, oh, I'm in mom's house. Like, I don't have to worry about all the adulting things. I just get to be here and be the kid. And when I have all my kids under one roof, we did this for the first time in a long time on Christmas Eve this last year. And my daughter ended up staying overnight on Christmas Eve night too. And so for one night, I had all of my babies under my roof. And I slept so well that night. Like, not that I lay awake worrying at night, but it's just this feeling, right, of calm and peace of, okay, I'm not going to wake up and wonder what's going on. Everybody's right here. So
I know with one of my friends, her kids, when they were in college and now they're grown adults in their late 20s, she put a tracking thing on their phone, just not to know, not really to care, but to know that they were constantly moving and where they were if she hadn't heard from them in a few days, to be sure. Like, both of them at one point were in Boston in college. And so she worried about them going out with friends and partying and, were they getting home safely, especially with her daughter getting into an Uber or, wandering the streets looking for a cab or something.
yeah. Well, and we do share our locations. We all have the same type of phone, so we share our locations, me included, right? And that all started when I was a single mom for a period of time. And my kids are like, no, mom, you need to share your location because we need to be able to know where to start looking for you if you disappear. And I worry less with my daughter because she has a partner, right, that she goes home to every day. And if she goes missing, he's going to pick up the phone. He's going to call me and he's going to be like, hey, I haven't seen Kinsey. But with my boys, neither one of them has anyone that they live with. No one would know, if they weren't heard from for a day or two. So I would worry a little more about them. And we've used the sharing of locations, like even when your kids live at home, right? So Cade knows if he goes to hang out with his sister and then comes home late at night, like he'll usually text me, say, I'm home. So if I wake up in the middle of the night, I can just look at my phone. Oh yeah, he made it home. I don't have to get up and look out the window to see if his car's in the driveway. But if he forgot to text me, I can just hit location and I can see that he's here. So, it's one of those things where I don't view it as an invasion of privacy, and neither do my kids, because of the way in which we use it. But if you're that parent who's like, oh my gosh, I saw you went to Club 911, you shouldn't be hanging out there. Like, your kids aren't going to be open to sharing that with you. So it's all in how you use it.
It has converted now. Both of my daughters are married and mothers. One of my son-in-laws, they live close to me. And if I'm at their house and I leave and it's night, he texts me, are you home safely?
Yeah, they start to worry about us just like we do about them. Right?
Yep, I'm good. Thank you.
The walking by the bedroom, I think for a lot of parents in the fall is kind of a trigger. To me, when my kiddos were in college and they didn't have their own apartment, I still felt like their place to land was at home in their room, right? So I kept their room as it was. But when they have their own apartment, they take their stuff with them. And that space now is common space. Like, my oldest, still, there's a certain bedroom, it's this one, that he sleeps in when he comes home, but there's nothing in here that belongs to him, right? So I think for parents, if your kid is moving out to their own apartment, you need to talk through that, because sometimes your kids will come back home and they'll be like, you got a new couch? Like, how did I not know you got a new couch? Like, it's a hard adjustment for them too, because they expect home to look like home, when they come home. And when you're changing things up on them, right? That's how they perceive it. You're changing things up on them and you're like, well, you don't live here anymore. You've got your own apartment. But that's a great conversation to have with your kids once they move out into truly their own space, is how things at home may change or morph, or you might utilize their bedroom for an office or a workout room or whatever that might be when they don't need it anymore.
Or you'll look at things and all of a sudden see things that you never saw before. They may not have changed, but they weren't important to you before, so you didn't think about it. Or, when you came in, you went right into your room and you didn't stop in the living room or the dining room or whatever it is. So do you have any suggestions for parents who are going through their first empty nest?
The journey of leaving is your child's, right? That's your child's story. Let them navigate it. Let them navigate it. Be the curious observer, kind of stand back. I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine this morning via text. She is moving her youngest into college tomorrow. They've got this. Like they can figure it out. If they want your opinion or they want your help, they will ask for it, right? So you can be there, be a support, but let them navigate their own journey, right? Because you have a journey of your own to worry about. So if you are just trying to stuff down your feelings and that sadness wells up and you're like, oh, I'm going to sit and I'm going to scroll Instagram and Facebook and I'm not going to feel these feelings, right? They're going to stay with you and it's going to come out in ways that you don't want, right? It's going to be unhealthy dealing with emotions. The average emotion, if you actually sit with it, only takes 90 seconds to move through your body. So if you just sit with it and recognize it for what it is, name it. Be like, yeah, I'm really sad. Like I haven't seen them in 2 weeks. I just walked past their bedroom and the stuffed bear sitting on the shelf like made me cry. Allow those feelings. Talk to friends, talk to your spouse, talk to your neighbor, talk to a professional counselor, like get yourself whatever help you need to actually deal with those emotions. Sometimes moms, especially, I would imagine there's probably some dads, but will go through a period of depression and it could be situational, right? Like very brief, but it could also be something that turns a little more serious. So don't let it go on for too long. If you're sitting in that dark space for longer than a couple weeks, get some help. Take care of yourself. Put your self-care at the top of the schedule. Make sure you're doing your best with your nutrition, with your movement, with your sleep, like all of those positive healthcare things.
Life quakes or life transitions and the aftershocks that follow are something we all experience. A life quake can stem from the heartbreaking grief that arises from the loss of a loved one or the disorientation felt when life suddenly shifts due to the loss of a job, relationship, identity, or health challenge. Learning to navigate these transitions with mindfulness, grace, and self-compassion is the key to finding your way back to joy, happiness, and inner peace. Advanced Grief Recovery Method Specialist and Certified Life Transition Coach, Amy Lindner Lesser, MSW, expertly supports clients to navigate their life quakes and transitions with warmth, kindness, and grace. Learning to accept support as you navigate your way through the aftershocks is one of the most powerful gifts you can give yourself. Learn more at introspection.com. That's introspection.com.
You don't have to worry about the daily operations of your child in your orbit anymore, right? You're not keeping track of zoom, zoom, zoom. So you have a lot of time on your plate right now, especially if this is your last, to pay attention to you. And that's actually the best gift you can give your child, is to take good care of yourself so that you're around for them when they're older, like you said, married, having babies, those kinds of things. The best gift you can give them is to take care of yourself. So find ways to keep yourself busy that are constructive. So maybe you start a new challenge for yourself. Hey, I want to walk this many miles in the month of October, or I want to pick up a new hobby. So I'm going to, if I wanted to knit, I brought that up before. We have a knitting place in town. So like I've never knit before, but I could go there and I could try to find out. And I know they have knitting nights for beginners and advanced. And I could go and find a new community, right, to be a part of. Work on personal growth, self-growth. There are so many books and podcasts out there because this is your next chapter. So a lot of times we get so focused on the child's next chapter that we forget that for us, this is our story and this is our next chapter. And what do you want that to look like?
It's important to mention that many of these mothers have partners. And for however many years you've had that partner in the house with the child, I don't want to say that you've ignored your personal relationship, but for the most part, the couple relationship has been on the back burner. The kids have taken the front space. So this is a good time. If you've got extra hours, go back to rediscovering why you fell in love with that person and give them some more attention. Give yourself, you always need to put yourself first, and then give them time.
Yeah, because you need to be a whole person, right? To be able to show, you need to know who you are in this new space in life. And, so maybe it's putting a date night back on the calendar, right? That might not have been there since the kids were little, and you could hire a sitter, mostly out of necessity. Because I know if you've got multiple kids, like my ex-husband and I, we 3 kids, right? And before we had drivers, like they were going every which direction. And even it was a logistical meeting every Sunday to figure out how everybody was getting where they needed to go when they needed to be there. And so, yeah, we were having logistical discussions, right? But that's not the same as saying, hey, you want to start this new walking challenge with me? Can we go for a walk after dinner 3 nights a week? Like, can we do that? Or, hey, what's something new? Can we put a vacation on the schedule? You don't have to work around anybody else's schedule right now, And that maybe doesn't only look like parents' weekend at college. That looks like actually picking something that works for you. But it is a whole new season of discovery. And while you might be sad and you might have a loss of identity during this time, it is an exciting new time because you are opening a brand new chapter in your book. And if you're kind of stuck with that was my identity, I don't know what I like, I don't know what I want, I don't know who I am, like hooking up with a life coach is something that can help. Like that's why I picked transitions to coach women on, because there are so many we go through in life. And this is a big one because for, 27 years now, if I include the time I was pregnant, like I have been a mom first. And all of a sudden they're off doing their own thing. And I'm still a mom, but it's not at the top of my priority list.
You don't have to do the mom things as much. But, even in the case where a child has died, it doesn't take away being a mom for the mom.
No, it will always be there.
Yep. You and I do basically the same thing. We work with life transitions. I call them life quakes because when they're smaller transitions, you often don't need anybody's help to get through them. But the life quakes are the ones where you become that blow up cloud that people punch and it goes, and you need some help standing.
Yeah. And sometimes you just get frozen because you haven't ever allowed yourself to think through, what is it I want for this next chapter of my life? Who do I want to become? It's okay to have those big dreams. And most people don't have a lot of capacity or time when they are raising littles and then bigs to wrap their brain around a dream for themselves, for what that looks like afterwards. And so it can be a thing where you're just kind of stuck and you don't know what the next right steps are. And you really want to work through, what is my current value set, not what society tells me, not the values I was raised with, but the values that truly matter to me and my spouse. And like, where's this ship headed? Right. And what does our journey look like? And how do we navigate that? Whether you're solo or whether you have a partner, it's fun stuff to discuss, but sometimes it's hard to get from the I'm so sad my kid left, and then you get to Christmas break and they come home and you're still feeling that way, and then they leave again after Christmas break and you're right back where you were in September.
It's almost like visiting weekend at camp. I remember the camp that my kids went to. As they got older, we were allowed to take them out and overnight. So they would come and stay in the hotel with us overnight. They didn't allow the younger kids to do that because it was too difficult for the kids to have all that parent time and then have to say goodbye. It's the same kind of thing. I really appreciate you mentioning that an emotion takes 90 seconds to fully feel. It doesn't mean you're not going to feel that emotion another time, but if you sit with it, it's a minute and a half. I mean, how often have we wasted many more minutes and seconds than that? So just let it go through and deal with it. If we don't deal with it, it will come out in another way, and it'll come out probably in more harmful way.
And it, as a society, right, we're not really programmed to do that, to take the time and go to whatever our safe place is. I have a chaise lounge that I bought myself when I graduated from coaching school that's in my office. And like, if I have an emotion I need to process, like, that's where I go. And my body has now learned through practice that that's what happens in that chair, that that's a safe zone, right? And just go feel your feelings. And then when you're done, like, yeah, you might need to do something rejuvenating, or you might need to do something restful, or depending on the size and the intensity, right, of what you've just worked through. But like you said, it's not the only time you're probably going to feel that emotion, but each time you allow yourself to feel it, the next time you have to move through that same emotion around the same issue, you'll be able to move through it much faster and rebound much better because of that.
Definitely true. And it's also, I think, important that we mention that every empty nest is different, not just between two different parents. You know, a couple can experience the same child in two different ways. If there are more children, each child's departure is going to be different. And for somebody else, it could be completely different. If you're not upset, it's okay too.
Yeah, right? If you've had a child that you've had a lot of difficulty with through those teenage years, like, sometimes it is a breath of fresh air when they actually are out of the house. And sometimes that relationship just gets better because that dynamic has shifted. And the parent and child that are leaving are not the only people in the household that are affected by the change. So if this is your first or second or fifth leaving and there's still a kid at home, every time someone leaves, it changes the dynamic of the family. So don't expect, like, your additional kids that are left at home to behave exactly like they did, because there's a new pecking order in town and there's a new shuffle going on, and it will look different and there will be growing pains for everyone.
And they're going through their own empty nest. Yeah, it's loss. Grief comes from any change in any relationship that's important.
When I went to college as a freshman, my youngest sister, who's 7 years younger than me, had a dollar to her name. And she took this dollar and folded it up as teeny as she could, and then wrote me a letter and stuck it in there and asked my parents for a stamp and my address and sent it to me. She didn't want my parents to know that she was sending me money. So that's why she folded it up so tiny. But, she's just like, I want you to go buy yourself something special. And like, that was her way, right, of dealing with the fact that her big sister was so far away and she wanted to be able to do something to support me in that new life, right? And she was 7 years younger than me. So I was 18. That doesn't make her very old, right? And and so it's a beautiful thing to watch the littles, the ones you still have at home, like, watch the siblings they either have great relationships with and look up to, or the siblings that are kind of difficult relationships. You might have a younger kid that comes into their own because their older sibling has left the nest. So just be open for what you're going to experience, because it is a dynamic and a shifting landscape.
And it won't go on forever. The
Correct.
feeling will eventually level out and you'll come to a new relationship.
Although I still stand in the driveway every time one of them pulls away. And the tears still come, not a ton, but they do still come. And I've asked friends who have much older children, I'm like, does it ever get any easier? Because I remember my grandma standing on the front stoop crying when we would pull away. I remember my mother standing on the front stoop crying, and now I'm doing it. Like, and they're like, nope, never gets. So I've just resigned myself to the fact, we are an emotional family, but resigned myself to the fact that I will be on that front step every time they leave, or every time they're dropping me off at the airport. I get to go see my son here in a couple weeks. And every time he drops me at the airport or I drop him at the airport, it's a cry fest. But that's okay. That's okay. That's part of our journey.
I don't do it with my younger daughter because she's 7 miles from me, so I know I'll see her easily. My other daughter, I live in New York State. At the moment, they're living in Virginia. So if they come here and leave, I'm like, "Go," or when I leave them, it's emotional.
But that's a good sign, right? Like, that's a good sign that, if you weren't at all sad, which is okay, like, all feelings are valid, right? Like, if you're not sad and you still spent time together, like, that's still a good sign, right? It's like nobody's divorced themselves from the situation. There's always hope there. Like, even if the relationship is bad or completely shut off, right? There's always hope there. But when there's tears there, that's a good sign that you did appreciate your time with each other and that you value it.
You had said something a while back, and I was thinking, I'm older. My kids are 36 and almost 40. I know for women of my generation and above, beyond, whatever the word is, 60s and up, many women were not given the freedom to decide what they wanted to do with their lives. I think that came more after me. And so even when I coach, when I talk to women whose partners have passed away or whose kids are now gone and they have this, what I say is look at it as the first time in your life, maybe, that you have the freedom to not give a damn about what anybody else is telling you. You choose who you want to be. Try things out. You don't have to stick with the first thing. But if you became a teacher because that's what your parents told you girls had to do, you don't. You don't have to work if you're in your 70s or whatever. But if you still want to work, then choose what you want to do.
There was a very narrow script. I think I'm 56. I'm not that far beyond 60, but there was a very narrow script for people just even a little bit older than me about what your choices were when you graduated from high school, right? Like, you either got married and became a mom, or you became a secretary or a nurse or a teacher. Like, there were very few women that went on to higher callings. Some did, but very few that actually did that. And so my mom is actually in a book club, and I was part of an anthology, and I wrote a chapter about why I created this business, right? And this life coach business. And my mom chose it for her book club to read. And there were women in their 70s in her book club that were like, "Oh my gosh, I wish I would have had a life coach to talk to back when I was younger," right? Like, how their journey would have looked different. But times have changed drastically, and for the good, in my opinion. There are others out there who may not think it's for the good, but everybody has autonomy over their own life. And even if you have not experienced the ability to act on that autonomy previously in your life, this is your shot. This is your shot. Take it. And it's like, if you don't shoot your shot, you're going to regret that. Like, nobody's going to their grave, saying, "Oh, it's really a great thing that I didn't chase that dream." Nobody is saying that, right? So if you've got something on your heart, now's your chance. Now's your chance to do it.
Definitely. I mean, I just turned 68. And I remember standing in the guidance office at my high school, and I knew I was going to college. My mother had a master's when she got married, and then got her doctorate later on. Actually, I was in college when she did. I remember standing there saying I wanted to be an engineer. And the guidance counselor said, "Oh, no, girls can't be engineers." And I ended up not doing it, which was the right decision, that I wouldn't have been happy, even though I was great at math. I loved numbers. I needed to work with people. And I figured that out a little later on in life. But that was the way things were in the 70s, the early 70s. They were still telling girls and women what they could and couldn't do.
Well, and the beauty of it is you can have more than one career. You can leave more than one part to your legacy, right? Like, even if you were a teacher for 30 years and then all of a sudden you decided after your kids are grown, you want to make a pivot and do something completely unrelated, like, you have the ability to do that and the freedom to do that now. And so, I would encourage people to not necessarily look at the straight line they've been walking this whole time and doing what's expected of them or what was told they needed to do by society or the times or their parents. Or you don't have to do what's expected of you anymore, and you don't have to apologize for that. So, I would really encourage women, if you've got some wild hair, that if there's people in your life telling you you can't do that, that's crazy, do it anyway, and do it scared.
I think in some ways we can thank COVID for that, because the world of work doesn't look the same anymore. Just in the past 5 years, it has changed so much, and I think it really did open up the workforce, that you don't have to worry about relocating necessarily because you can work from home, or you could go into a co-working space, or you go into an office in a hybrid situation. Also, people are inventing their own jobs and their own careers because of that. It's like, "Oh, I would like to do a little bit of this, and I wanna do a little bit of that." I certainly would never have thought to be, a life transitions coach or a grief coach. I was a social worker, and then I was an innkeeper. It just there were a lot of other things that I've done in there too. Never thought of doing this kind of life coaching.
Yeah. Well, and that's the beauty of the tapestry of your life, right? Like you've got all of those different pieces, and you wouldn't be able to be the grief coach you are now had you not gone through those other transitions. And I think it is a beautiful testimony to the way that the world has changed, that we can all find our purpose and our gifts and be able to find a way to use them on the daily, right? That makes us feel fulfilled and is serving other people. And that is how the planet is going to heal, right? Is if we are all using the gifts we were sent here to use. Whether you believe in God or the universe or a higher power, I call them all the collective. That's what I call them, because there's way too many forces at work here beyond just me, for any of this to have become possible. So, I think just really being open to that calling that you might be feeling, but in order to hear that, you have to get quiet. And this is also, empty nesting is a great time to be able to say, you know what, from this time to this time every day, I'm going to sit with a journal, or I'm going to sit with my note taker on my phone, and I'm going to capture my thoughts that will come to me as I sit here quietly, right? You can't hear them in the fray of running back and forth to school 27 times in a week, which I counted one week, and I was doing that when my kids were in high school. So it's a new opportunity to realize those destinies for sure.
And I had the same thing after my mother and stepfather passed. All of a sudden, I found all of this time on my hands. I was still running a business, but I was like, I've been driving back and forth to the assisted living and then to the nursing home. Oh my God, I have like 3 or 4 hours a day that I was spending on top of my full day. And at that time, I ran a 20-room inn. So that was a 24-hour job. And I'm like, where did these hours come from? So it's been great. And we need to end, unfortunately. I feel like I could talk for hours more. So if people would like to find you, what's the best way for them to do that?
The best and easiest way is to visit my website at marcihawkinson.com. I am also on Facebook at Life Coach Marci and Instagram at life_coach_Marci. So that is the easiest way to find me. There's ways to message me on all of those platforms.
And we will have all of those in the show notes, so people didn't have to write them down and say, "Oh, I missed them."
Yes. And Kate and I have done some episodes and published them already about the different paths kids take, about when a kid decides to pivot at the last minute, about leaving home, and all about the whole empty nesting process. So listen to Raising Bigs. Again, it's available on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube.
Thank you so much, Marci.
Thank you, Amy, for the opportunity.
Everybody, join us again in 2 weeks for the next podcast. And please reach out to Marci if she can help. And we'll see you soon. If you liked what you heard on this podcast and want to hear more, please follow us and tell your friends. You can also find me on Facebook at Amy Lindner Lesser, Grief to Growth Life Coaching, and on LinkedIn at Amy Lindner Lesser. Thanks again